If
Yeah,
you
yeah, no kidding. I mean, you can sell pretty easy. I mean, it's one of those basic techniques. It is actually not that easy necessarily. It depends on the thing you're trying to sell the audience, trying to sell them on. It can be difficult, but mostly, even the most outlandish things can be relayed pretty well. It's actually when you get to human nature and you expect people that, oh, humans don't act this way in my setting or something. Well, that's confusing. I mean, like, if it's actually as basic as like, well, I'm mad that you slapped me. If the character doesn't like feel anything, like, oh, I got hit in the face and I'm not actually at all put out by it, well, that's kind of weird. That's
yeah.
not exactly human behavior. It's kind of harder to sell something like that than it is to sell, oh, we're on the moon or something.
Well, that's where Game of Thrones season 7 failed. Daenerys' portrayal in the last season, not to follow the actor, not to follow the of them. It's just that they decided to end it. Her whole portrayal was like a complete slap in the face.
Yeah,
a slap in the face of what had come before. If she had always been that way, that would have worked. That's not what
right.
happened.
But they didn't build up to it appropriately. They had been promising a different ending the whole time. And
Yeah.
that partially because they did such a faithful opening of the show. The first 4 seasons very faithful, and even 5 and 6 aren't that crazy. But then as just the show goes on, it gets more and more winding and like more and more disappointing to me, frankly.
Well, that's because they had no material work. They only had up to Dance with Dragons, which is the 5th book of the series.
Yeah, I mean, I'd argue that they could have done better, but we don't have to go on about this.
No,
they could have done better because they did pretty well with some of the stuff they improvised before, and it's possible if you're a storyteller, if you know how to tell a story, you'd be able to figure out how to finish that story.
I'm actually going to talk about a show like that I thought was an interesting take going in a completely different direction that outside the source material, which was Fullmetal Alchemist.
Oh yeah, first show was really good.
Yeah, the first
show was fine too, and they're both good. Both good shows.
Yeah, Brotherhood's better because it's more because again they have the entire material to use for it. Which you might remember what the first show was. The first show they had up to May Hughes' murder. Right.
Yeah, they did not have a lot, and that's why the beginning of that show was so good, is because they built up to it in this amazing way. And that's one of the honestly, I know you said that Brotherhood is better. I actually used to think that. I'm more like, well, the ending of Brotherhood is a little better because it's not a total asspull because they had the material for it. But most of the other show was actually executed more to my liking, to be honest.
The first half. This is how I would say this. This is what I would say. The first half of the first show, is one of the best. I love the tone, the pacing was
so dark,
amazing. Yeah. I thought, and I will give them credit where credit's due, considering the material they had, considering the ideas they had back then. It's a pretty cool interpretation of her material. It wasn't unfaithful to it. Like the one thing about it was the concept wasn't unfaithful at all. And the twist at the end, like the last 2 episodes, you just don't see coming.
And but the mistake is you can't see it coming because there's no foreshadowing for most of it. It's not the ending they were foreshadowing, I think.
Well,
except tonally, it's actually perfect.
Very
good tonally, but the actual events are not.
They did foreshadow a little bit of it. This sort of thing is they did a really cool thing when. Guys, I'm spoiling Fullmetal Alchemist the original. It's okay. Brotherhood is
2003
really
edition, yeah.
Yeah. Brotherhood's really good. When they sent him to our world, I knew that the ending would involve going back to our world in some way, somehow. How they got there was incredible. I thought it was a very and I knew they were going back there, which is why when he dies the episode before, you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and it was perfect. It was Envy, as we knew Envy in that show. It was perfect for Envy. It was such a good. What I really really love about the first show versus the second show, because I think this is the big major difference. I love the homunculi in the first show better.
They're
a lot better. They're a lot more, with 2 exceptions.
Yeah.
Bradley and Pride, right? Like the kid and Bradley are better in the second show than the first show, but the rest of the homunculi are so much more well developed, so human, right? That you're like, you understand all of their references. In the second show, the human characters are better.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. That's a great point because the homunculi are way more important in the first show too.
Yes, absolutely. No,
well.
yeah, they're way more important. They're more human characters in the first show.
And the funny thing about that, sorry not to cut you off, but the funny thing about that is that the two shows actually are different genres, basically, of anime. So Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 is basically a horror show in a lot of ways. It's got this scary element, it's horror fantasy, but it's not really a traditional shonen series like the second show is, like the original manga is, which is very much more like a, okay, this is going to be a build of power, it's a fantasy and epic fantasy, basically. But there's not that dark element to it in the same way.
No, it's a different darkness. It's a really different. It's a really different darkness. It's still there, and I actually figured out a way to link both shows together. I'm going to pitch it to the studio because I think they've opened that door. The fact of crossing worlds. Yeah, and I thought there's one thing left they could say about both shows. That I think it's a cool way to bridge both shows.
They're both canon. Yeah, they're both parallel.
You can make them both canon, and you can also do it in a way like the reason why that show works so well. It's the same reason Ninja Turtles work so well. It's about family. Ultimately, it's about what two brothers will do for each other for love. Both shows have that theme, and they both do it very well. And like I said. Personally, the payoff in Brotherhood's better. I think the reason why
I agree. I actually agree with that. I think the ending, but the part where I kind of more up in the air about which one's actually a better show is that I think most of the other show is actually better, and that's that's a huge difference. Because they'd rushed some things in Brotherhood just because they were in the previous show, and they wouldn't have done it like if you had the beginning of the first show and the end of Brotherhood. I think it'd basically be the perfect show. I mean, if they somehow fit together in a way that made sense, it's
different. It's also the fact that Brotherhood's a quicker show. From a tonal standpoint, even
very fast paced compared.
Yeah, it's a much faster paced show than the original was, and so
that's a good argument too. I mean, why it's slightly better in some ways. But it's very different.
Yeah, they're very different. But again, they're both great shows.